The moment the doors of Iron Ridge Tactical Armory swung open, the lively clatter of metal and the smell of gun oil inside the room seemed to freeze for half a beat. A woman stepped in, her faded field jacket, her tactical boots worn at the edges as if they had accompanied her across the most desolate stretches of America. She looked so ordinary that she was almost forgettable, and that very ordinariness made the entire shop suddenly louder. Brandon Knox, the skinny clerk with a goatee who always thought he knew everything, let out a mocking snicker the instant he saw her. "Hey, lady, we don't serve latte here. The coffee shop's across the street." His voice carried that shallow confidence of someone who used volume to mask their lack of real knowledge. A group of customers near the glass display, led by Tyler Briggs, the influencer who wore a backward cap and live-streamed himself showing off tactical gear, also jumped in. Resting his energy drink loosely on his thigh, he smirked. "Check out that canvas backpack. That she thinks this is some vintage store." Laughter rippled through the room like waves, bouncing off the shelves where sniper rifles glimmered under cold white light. Melissa Hartley, the stylish socialite dressed to impress but holding a mock-up gun like it was a fashion accessory, squinted, lifted her phone to snap a quick photo, and muttered a bored, mocking line. "Cute. Wanders into the man's world without a clue." Ava Mercer didn't respond. She didn't bow her head. She didn't show a flicker of embarrassment. She simply stood still, like a cold draft drifting into a room full of arrogance. Her low-tied black hair shifted slightly as she scanned the space, careful, calm, as though she were reading every person in the room with a kind of intuition none of them were perceptive enough to notice. In those deep brown eyes there wasn't an ounce of confusion or fear. There was only one thing: absolute stillness. And that stillness made a few people hesitate, even as they forced their laughter to hide the strange discomfort creeping in. Ava padded farther inside, her boots tapping against the wooden floor with a sound so soft it felt intentional. She didn't look at the ones mocking her. She didn't look offended. Instead, her eyes rested on a spot no one else paid attention to: the sniper rifle display, where rifles were placed in a way only someone who truly understood them would view with respect. For a brief moment, the air in the shop shifted. It was no longer just meaningless laughter. It was unease. The sense that they had just said the wrong thing to the wrong person, in the worst possible way. Ava raised her hand slightly, touching the glass of the rifle case. A tiny gesture, but sharper than any verbal comeback. And that was the very first moment the entire store began to lose its noisy confidence. Ava hadn't even made it past the third aisle when Brandon Knox hurriedly slipped in front of her, planting himself there as if he had the authority to decide who was allowed to stand in which part of the store. Brandon tapped the end of his pen lightly against the counter and smirked with that know-it-all expression. "You're lost. This section is for people who actually know what they're looking at." His voice was loud enough for the others nearby to seize the moment, swarming in like fish rushing into muddy water. Tyler Briggs raised his phone, glanced at his live stream, and let out a loud laugh. "Look at her. She's probably trying to find a place to buy home decor." A few others, people who knew nothing about guns but were excellent at judging, began turning their backs, giving Ava sideways looks as if her very presence here was ridiculous. Melissa even shook her head, putting on a fake sympathetic expression. "Sweetheart, this is Iron Ridge Tactical Armory, not a craft workshop. Wrong store." But the woman standing before them showed absolutely no reaction. No blushing, No awkward smile. No avoidance. Ava Mercer stood there like a rock in the middle of a noisy stream, so silent that those making noise began to feel uneasy. Her eyes slowly swept across the rifles displayed behind the transparent glass, not with the curiosity of an outsider, nor the greedy fascination of someone showing off. It was the gaze of someone deeply familiar. So familiar, she could tell at a glance whether a scratch came from a manufacturing flaw or from the battlefield. And that very thing made Earl Whitmore, a 63-year-old former artilleryman with a lifetime of experience, furrow his brows slightly. Standing a few steps away, his calloused hands instinctively tightened, as if he had just recognized something familiar hidden beneath the woman's unassuming appearance. No one noticed Earl's small reaction. They only saw a woman with an old backpack, someone worth mocking, an easy target to display their arrogance. Ava took another step, but this time another figure blocked her, a big, broad-shouldered guy in a brown hunter jacket. His shadow fell over Ava long and heavy as if announcing his dominance. "Hey, you're blocking the view of the real customers here." His voice rang out clearly, deliberately louder than usual. He glanced down at Ava's backpack and let out a short laugh. "What's in there? Needles and thread? Embroidery stuff?" A few people clapped. Some laughed so loudly that they didn't know what they were laughing at. Ava stopped. She didn't retreat. She didn't challenge him. She simply lifted her head and looked straight at the man in front of her. That gaze held no anger, nor any defiance. It was still, but strangely deep. A kind of stillness only carried by someone who had witnessed real danger. The hunter froze for a brief moment. No one else noticed, but he felt it. Like she had just looked through all the layers of toughness he tried so hard to project. Ava stepped around him, gently, no contact. Not a single word. And that quietness made the laughter around them soften, just slightly. The hunter watched her walk away, trying to let out a forced laugh to save face, but his voice no longer carried its earlier confidence. "Whatever. She's nobody." But some people had begun to sense something strange. Very strange. The way Ava moved, slow, controlled, each step gliding across the floor without leaving a sound, resembled the gait of someone who had been formally trained, not someone cluelessly wandering into a gun store. And in that moment, Iron Ridge Tactical Armory, normally bustling and loud, began to develop a thin layer of silence, like a faint sign that everything here was about to shift, in a direction none of them could have predicted. Ava stopped in front of the sniper rifle display, where the long, cold weapons lay motionless under a mystical white light, beautiful in a cruel way. The glass reflected her deep brown eyes, creating the sense that two worlds were touching. One side was a noisy room full of prejudice. The other was the stillness of someone who had walked through war. Brandon Knox still wasn't done. He stepped right behind Ava, close enough to seem provoking, far enough not to be considered rude. The kind of man who pretended to be polite while really just trying to corner someone. "What are you even looking at?" He jerked his chin up, his voice laced with fake pity. "These cost more than your entire outfit." A few bursts of laughter followed, crude, shallow, and identical to the ones before. But Ava didn't look at them. She stayed silent for 2 more breaths, as if double-checking something inside her mind that only she knew. Then she lifted her head. Her gaze passed over Brandon, then through the crowd, waiting for her to react for their entertainment. And with a voice soft as a breeze, but clear enough that everyone in the room heard every word, Ava said, "Show me the Raven M12, Spectre Edition." For one full second, the world felt like someone had hit the pause button. Brandon blinked, didn't understand, couldn't even put on his usual contemptuous expression in time. Tyler Briggs, who was live streaming, froze so hard that his viewers thought the video had lagged. The energy drink in his hand slipped and rolled in a perfect circle before coming to a stop. Melissa Hartley, who had been admiring her nails, whipped her head around instantly, as if pulled by a string. Earl Whitmore, the old artillery veteran, was the first to break the silence. "What did the girl just say?" Everyone in the room turned to Earl, as if hoping he'd correct them, say they misheard. But Earl actually stepped back, his face draining of color. He whispered, his voice trembling, not out of fear, but because a memory from somewhere far away had just surged back. Spectre Edition. That's not for civilians. Only the Shadow Raptor Unit was ever allowed to touch that. A cold wave rippled across the entire room, as fast as an Arizona desert wind, slashing through. Brandon let out a laugh, but it broke midway, turning into a sharp breath. You don't know anything. Why ask for a classified piece?" But Ava didn't need to answer. She tapped lightly on the glass, a sound so soft yet echoing like a needle falling into silence. "Is it here or not? If it is, bring it out." Manager Scott Devereaux, who had been watching from the back office, had heard enough. He stepped out, broad-shouldered, face emotionless, eyes sharp like someone who had once served in law enforcement. No questions, no verification. He turned, opened the vault behind the counter, the kind customers never saw. Each turn of the lock echoed slowly, as if opening an entirely new chapter of the story. Then he stepped out, carrying a matte black weapon, smooth as dark water. Raven M12, Spectre Edition. The version that shouldn't exist isn't listed, and isn't for sale. The entire store held its breath. Even those who didn't understand guns could feel the weight of what had just appeared. The manager settled on the counter, said nothing. Ava stepped forward. Her movements weren't showy, weren't rushed, but precise to the point of gentleness, as if she had touched the Raven M12 100 times in the dark, in places ordinary people had never heard of. Her eyes met the cold steel of the weapon. And at that exact moment, no one inside Iron Ridge Tactical Armory saw Ava as someone who wandered into the wrong store anymore. They saw her the way you see a secret that has accidentally stepped into the light. No drum roll, no effects, no introduction. The appearance of the Raven M12 Spectre Edition alone was enough to make the air inside Iron Ridge Tactical Armory tighten like a drawn bowstring. Manager Scott Devereaux stepped back as if wanting to distance himself from the center of an event he didn't even dare name. The rifle lay on the glass like a jet-black blade, still, yet always ready to tear through anything it was aimed at. Ava stood before it. Her eyes didn't widen, didn't show surprise, didn't display curiosity. That look resembled someone encountering an object familiar from another lifetime, something the body remembered more clearly than the mind. Brandon tried to reclaim his earlier swagger, exhaling theatrically, "You probably can't even hold it properly, let alone..." He didn't finish his sentence. Ava reached out her hand, a slow movement, perfectly controlled. She placed her palm on the weapon, not with the hesitant touch of someone seeing it for the first time, but with the familiarity of someone who knew every cold line of the metal. And then, with a precise grip at the exact balance point, Ava lifted the Raven M12 with one hand. Light. Clean. No tremor. No shift. No one could believe their eyes. Tyler Briggs, live streaming to tens of thousands, choked instantly. His phone camera shook because his hand was trembling. Melissa's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Earl Whitmore froze, as if dragged back to an old battlefield. Brandon stood motionless. His eyes widened so much that the veins in them were visible. "It weighs over 10 kilos, he muttered, almost to himself. Ava didn't answer. She rotated her wrist slightly to test the weight, and when the Raven M12 settled perfectly into her hand as if it were a part of her body, only one person in the room understood immediately what that meant. Earl, his voice hoarse and low. That's how the Raptors hold their rifles." Desperate to salvage his pride, Brandon jabbed a finger toward Ava, grasping at anything. "Fine then. Break it down. Don't tell me you learned some YouTube tricks." The half-smirk on his face vanished 1 second later, when Ava set the Raven M12 on the glass and began working. No words. No wasted motion. Only the sounds. Tack, king, plick. Soft, precise, steady, like the breathing of a master jeweler. Everything happened so quickly that onlookers only saw her 10 fingers moving as if writing a secret language only she understood. 8 seconds later, the Raven M12 was no longer a rifle. It was a line of components arranged perfectly. The frame, the barrel, the trigger assembly, the bolt, each securing screw, each tiny pin glinting under the lights. Silence. No one could speak. Even the gunshots from the test range behind the store seemed to fade. Only the faint breathing of people who had just witnessed a skill they believed existed only in movies remained. Tyler Briggs pointed his phone at the dismantled parts, whispering in near panic. What is this? This isn't normal human skill." Ava still said nothing. She pulled a paperclip from her backpack, the cheap kind everyone forgets in their desk, and tapped it lightly against the bolt. A tiny thing rang out. Ava spoke softly, evenly, calmly. "This bolt is off by 0.3 millimeters. In cold wind, the round will drift off target." The entire store swallowed hard in unison. Earl whispered, barely himself anymore. How do you know that?" Ava didn't answer directly. She looked at Earl with the eyes of a comrade, eyes of someone who had once clung to the edge of a rock in the cold night where every breath could cost a life. Then she spoke, voice gentle but sharp as a blade. "Because I used this exact model at Eagle Crest Ridge. In level 7 winds, even 0.5 millimeter will erase your center point." No one repeated a single mocking word from earlier. No one dared. The room seemed to shrink, as if Ava Mercer had pulled them all into a world none of them were worthy of stepping into, because they were standing before someone who wasn't just knowledgeable about guns. They were standing before a legend they had failed to recognize. If earlier all the Mockery had been nothing more than dull knives trying to slice the air, then now the atmosphere inside Iron Ridge Tactical Armory had solidified into a slab of stone. No one dared laugh anymore. No one wanted to say another word. Yet someone still tried to salvage the last scraps of pride. Tyler Briggs, the backward cap influencer whose face was still pale from watching the rifle disassembly, hurriedly moved his phone camera to hide the tremor in his voice. "Fine. You know some techniques, but shooting is different. Out on the range, nobody measures skill by taking toys apart." He jerked his chin toward the back door where the Arizona evening wind drifted in, carrying red dust and the scent of sagebrush. There's a quarter hanging out there. 175 meters. He emphasized the distance as if it were impossible to overcome. No one's ever hit it. Ever. If you can even touch it, I'll live stream myself licking the floor clean. The crowd murmured, a few half-hearted laughs slipping out, no longer sharp but tinged with unease. Ava looked at Tyler for a few seconds with no mockery or threat in her eyes. She rotated her wrist and reassembled the Raven M12 with movements so smooth they resembled flowing water. Within a few breaths, the rifle was whole again. Clean, cold, perfect. When Ava stepped out to the firing range, the evening wind whipped against her face, carrying the dry scent of red soil and the creaking of wooden posts in the distance. The range stretched out like a drawn line, and at the far end hung a thin wire holding the quarter, so small that from afar it was nothing but a faint glint of reflected sunlight. That target wasn't meant for ordinary people, or even skilled people. It was meant for those who were not allowed to miss. The group rushed out after her, forming a semicircle behind Ava. Brandon crossed his arms, trying to appear composed. Tyler whispered into his phone, filming while swallowing his own panic, as if he feared choking on the humiliation that was about to come. Melissa hugged her handbag to her chest, looking as if she were watching a movie she wasn't sure she wanted to continue. Ava set her backpack on the ground. It landed with a very soft thud, but the group felt an unexpected reverence in that sound, as if the backpack carried pieces of her entire life. She raised the rifle. No scope adjustment, no test movements. None of the things normal people would do before attempting a shot harder than a competition shot. She simply stood there, letting the wind sweep through her faded field jacket. Ava rested her cheek lightly against the stock, looked down the sights, and remained in aiming position for barely 2 seconds. Scott Devereaux, the manager with a law enforcement background, practically stopped breathing. Then, boom! The shot rang out, sharp, clean, deep like a powerful heartbeat. A tiny metallic sound followed, tink, like faint shattering glass, delicate but exploding inside everyone's mind. The quarter had split in half. The two pieces fell, spinning in the sunset glow before settling onto the red dust. The entire range sank into silence, a primitive kind of silence, dense, so deep you could hear your own heartbeat. Earl Whitmore clenched his rifle grip so tightly his knuckles turned white, whispering, "God, that's Shadow Raptor precision." Melissa dropped her mock gun. It hit the ground and rolled, but no one seemed to care. Brandon stood frozen like a statue, eyes bulging, mouth ajar, but no sound coming out. And Tyler? His phone was still live streaming. Thousands are watching live. But he could only stutter 3 words. "You hit it?" Ava didn't answer. She simply slipped the rifle off her shoulder and placed it gently on the wooden table, as if setting down something delicate. No boasting, no triumphant expression. In that moment, every mocking word from earlier shattered like the 2 pieces of the quarter on the ground. Then, calmly, Ava turned and walked back inside, like someone who had just finished an ordinary task on an ordinary day. But for those who witnessed it, it was a moment they would never forget. Ava stepped back inside, her boots dusted with red soil, leaving quiet marks on the wooden floor. She didn't look around, didn't wait for acknowledgement. She simply walked back to the counter as if returning to finish an interrupted task. But to the people inside Iron Ridge Tactical Armory, She was no longer the woman who wandered into the wrong store. She was something they didn't dare name. The silence radiating from Ava felt like a pressure field that made anyone trying to speak swallow their words back down. Brandon Knox, once the loudest, stood frozen as if trapped in a still frame. He wanted to speak, but his mouth refused to listen to his brain. His eyes were red, whether from fear or humiliation, no one knew. Tyler Briggs was still live streaming, but his shaking hands made the camera jitter violently. Viewers spammed the comments, demanding to know what had just happened. Melissa Hartley was suddenly different. No more pouting, no more annoyed squinting. Instead, her hands clutched her purse straps so tightly her knuckles turned white, as though her body was instinctively reacting to something far beyond her control. Ava stood before the glass counter. Then, in a small, unconscious motion, she tugged her jacket sleeve to adjust the strap on her shoulder. A scar was revealed. Small, sharp, shaped like an arrow running along the bone of her hand. A mark that very few people in the world had ever seen. But anyone who had seen it would never forget. Earl Whitmore, the 63-year-old veteran of 2 wars, inhaled sharply, as if his heart had been squeezed. But the first person to speak wasn't Earl. It was Cole Maddox, the man who had been standing silently the entire time with granite-gray eyes and hands more scarred than Ava's. He stepped closer, just enough to see the scar clearly under the neon light. Cole murmured, like uttering a forbidden incantation. Arrowhead. The room froze. Cole swallowed hard, stepping half a pace back, something a man like him would never do unless truly shaken. She's Shadow Raptor number 17. A metallic clink rang out. Ting! Melissa dropped her keys. Brandon dropped his clipboard and didn't retrieve it. Tyler backed up until he hit the gun rack behind him. Shadow Raptor Unit. The Department of Defense's secret unit. A group that even seasoned soldiers only whispered about. A force that didn't exist on paper but existed in stories no one dared tell too loudly. Arrowhead. Sniper number 17. A combat record so extensive that most of it had been erased. Ava remained silent, as though the name had nothing to do with her. Brandon staggered backward, his voice trembling like he was pleading with something invisible. No way. She looks too normal. Earl whispered. The most dangerous people always look the most ordinary. Ava didn't deny it, didn't confirm it. She simply bent down, picked up a tiny screw left on the counter and placed it back in its exact spot, each movement precise and light as breathing. That calm wasn't confidence. It was truth that no one in the room was ready to face. And then, the armory door swung open. A cold gust swept in. Leather soles struck the wooden floor in steady steps, not fast, not slow. The stride of someone accustomed to moving through places of unnamed authority. A man in a black suit, dark glasses, immaculate to perfection, walked in. He didn't look at anyone, didn't react to the suffocating silence. He walked straight toward Ava Mercer, as if she were the only person in the room. When he stood before her, he stopped. The entire store held its breath. Then he tilted his head slightly and said the kind of sentence no civilian should ever hear. Confirmation code 870. Mission begins at 2200. A freezing shock ran down everyone's spine. But what happened next would be branded in their memories forever. The man in the black suit placed his hand over his heart, right over it, and bowed to Ava. A small gesture, very small, but a ritual reserved only for legends within the unit. A gesture no one outside Shadow Raptor should know. The whole store turned to stone, No one spoke. No one moved. Ava looked at him for 1 or 2 seconds, then gave a slight nod. She didn't boast. She didn't lower her voice with authority. She simply said, "I was hoping for a few more days of peace. But if needed, I still shoot accurate at 400 meters." It wasn't a threat. It was true. Cold, sharp truth. And when it dropped, the entire room seemed to fall a few degrees colder. No one stood as firmly as before. No one dared to look at her as the woman in the wrong store. Because they understood now. Ava Mercer was not who they thought she was. She was someone they should never have messed with. Agent Russell Kane stepped aside, allowing Ava to walk past him as if that path had always belonged to her. Uncontested, unobstructed. But before leaving the counter, Ava suddenly stopped. Not out of hesitation, not because she wanted to leave some final words, but because she had a habit, a small ritual only those who have lived on the edge between life and death would understand. Ava opened her backpack. The zipper's soft rasp echoed in the silent room like a blade cutting through glass. She searched for a few seconds, then pulled out a small metal box, no larger than a pack of cigarettes. The casing was dull, marked with strange scratches, as if it had once rolled across stone floors, scraped against walls, opened and closed hundreds of times on sleepless nights. She set it on the counter. The clack rang sharp and heavy, making Brandon jerk like someone had squeezed his heart. No one knew what was inside the box. No one dared ask, but everyone felt it. Whatever was in there was not something ordinary people should see. Ava spoke softly, her voice calm as if commenting on the weather. "Keep it, to remember that today, your first judgment was wrong." No blame, no sarcasm, just a gentle reminder, but sharp enough to slice through every layer of pride in the room. She zipped her backpack closed and prepared to leave. But Melissa, the woman who had once laughed the loudest, spoke first. Her voice trembled lightly, unconsciously, like someone who had brushed too close to something far bigger than herself. "Who are you really?" Ava stopped at the door, turned her head slowly. Her low-tied hair swayed slightly in the air from the AC vent. Her eyes weren't cold, nor angry. They held an unusual peace, the kind of peace belonging to someone who had seen far more than others could imagine. She didn't answer directly. She simply looked at Melissa with a gaze both warm and distant. Then Ava placed a single old shell casing on the counter next to the metal box. A small, simple object, but its surface had been polished in a way that didn't resemble a collector's piece. It looked like it had been wiped dozens of times with an old cloth, as if its owner refused to let dust settle on the memories attached to it. And Ava said, "The strongest thing isn't the sound of the gun. It's the reason you pull the trigger." The words dropped into the room like a stone into a still lake, quiet but deep, sending ripples no one could turn away from. She opened the door. Arizona's late afternoon sunlight spilled in, coating her faded jacket shoulder in a soft layer of gold. Agent Kane followed behind, silent like a programmed shadow built only to protect. Ava didn't look back, didn't wait for anyone to speak. She stepped out of Iron Ridge Tactical Armory, leaving behind a clerk no longer brave enough to glare at others. An influencer frozen mid-live stream, speechless. A socialite clutching her bag like a lost child. A battlefield veteran staring at his trembling hands, remembering people he once served beside. Ava walked to the black suburban SUV, opened the door, and got in. Her backpack rested in her lap, like a part of her body, like a memory only she understood. The door shut. The vehicle eased forward, pulling away from the dusty old parking lot, gliding like a silent shadow, before disappearing down the straight, endless road of Flagstaff. And as the dust settled, the only feeling left in the air was this. They had just encountered someone who did not belong to their world, who did not belong to their arrogance, who did not belong to their judgment. And the realization left them unsure of how even to breathe. After the black Suburban carrying Ava Mercer turned onto the pine-shadowed road leading out of Flagstaff, Iron Ridge Tactical Armory felt as if it had been abandoned inside a thick, suffocating silence. Not the dull kind, but the silence of a place that had just witnessed something far beyond its usual measure of reality. The mocking laughter from earlier had vanished like ash in the wind. Only the echoes remained, the sound of metal hitting the ground, the crack of a bullet splitting the quarter, and the eyes of people who no longer knew where to look to avoid their own shame. Brandon Knox, the one who had laughed the loudest, collapsed into the swivel chair behind the counter, hands shaking too hard even to hold a pen. When the landline rang, the sound sliced through the stillness like a sharp blade. The owner's voice came through, low and cold, as if he had just walked through a storm. "You messed with the wrong person, Brandon. As of this moment, you no longer work at Iron Ridge." Brandon tried to explain, but the words jammed in his throat. No one looked at him. No one intervened. He packed his things in silence, every motion weighed down by humiliation. The goatee that once made him feel confident now marked a mistake he would remember for the rest of his life. Tyler Briggs didn't fare any better. Returning home, he assumed the video of Ava would only boost his fame. But when he checked his phone the next morning, thousands of angry comments flooded in like a tidal wave. People called him a bully, someone who mocked military personnel, someone lacking basic decency. His follower count plummeted. His biggest sponsor issued a statement ending their contract the same day with one single line: "We do not work with those who are disrespectful and irresponsible." Tyler tried to live stream to explain himself, but his trembling voice and unfocused eyes only pushed viewers further away. As for Melissa Hartley, the woman who treated guns like luxury accessories, she received her own lesson. At a brunch in Scottsdale, she tried to retell the story like a joke, but the entire table fell silent. One friend set down her glass and asked, gently yet sharply, "You mocked a military operative, Melissa." That question alone slammed shut the door to every social gathering. No messages, no invitations, no polite smiles. She returned home in silence, realizing for the first time that her glamour was far more fragile than she thought. Earl Whitmore, the only veteran present, had a different reaction. That night he sat alone in a small bar, the warm yellow light washing over his lined face. He told the bartender as if recalling an old memory. "The way she held that rifle, that was how the snipers I served with held theirs. You can't mistake it." The bartender didn't fully understand, but he saw the respect in Earl's eyes, the kind reserved only for true soldiers. Earl finished his beer, left a tip, and walked out, with heavy steps, but a lighter heart. He knew he had witnessed something most people would never get to see in their entire lives. Henry Lawson, the elderly gunsmith, checked every Raven M12 in the storage the next morning. He said nothing, but his hands trembled slightly when he confirmed exactly what Ava had said. 3 rifles had a .3mm misalignment. That didn't just prove her skill. It proved the existence of someone who came from a world where the tiniest error could cost a life. Henry quietly fixed each rifle, each movement a silent apology. He kept the card Ava had given him, not to show off, but to remind himself that there are people the entire gunsmithing craft must bow to. Scott Devereaux, the manager who once believed he understood everything in the store, received another reminder. A man in a suit walked in, placed a thin folder on the counter, and left without a word. Scott didn't need to open it. He understood. It wasn't a warning. It was a confirmation. Ava Mercer did not belong to a world he had the privilege to judge. He went into his office, closed the door, and sat for a very long time, breathing heavily like someone carrying a secret he had no authority to carry. A few days later, on old military forums, a curious topic started stirring. Shadow Raptor Sniper, codename Arrowhead, level 7 wind, 400 meters range. No misses. No one confirmed it. No one denied it. But the people who stood inside Iron Ridge Tactical Armory that day, they knew better than anyone. They had mocked a ghost, a living legend, a person who didn't need to speak loudly to silence a room. Someone they would remember for the rest of their lives. Late that night, Flagstaff was drenched in the soft yellow glow of small roadside shops, fragile as the breath of a western town after a long day. No one knew where Ava Mercer was. No one knew what mission at 2200 meant. No one knew which city she would appear in next, which road she would travel, or which darkness she would step into. The kind ordinary people would never dare to enter. But none of that mattered anymore, because what Ava left behind wasn't a rifle, nor a jaw-dropping shot. What she left behind was a mirror that each of us could see ourselves in. One moment of judging the wrong person, one moment of assuming someone's worth because of their old backpack, worn-out boots, or quiet demeanor. Iron Ridge Tactical Armory closed that day under an atmosphere unlike any other. No more forced laughter, no more smug postures, no more cheap remarks. Instead, a heavy stillness, as if the room had finally learned what respect meant. And Ava, she left the way the strongest people always leave, without needing witnesses, without waiting for recognition. The same old backpack, the boots dusted with road dirt, and eyes carrying the calm only those who have faced death can understand. In the last light of the day, as the black Suburban carrying her merged into the sparse traffic of the Highlands, Earl Whitmore's whisper lingered like the perfect summary of everything. Real strength doesn't need noise. The most dangerous person is always the one with nothing to prove. A young man standing nearby heard that and quietly asked, "Then how do you know who that person is?" Earl smiled, his eyes narrowing as if gazing into a battlefield long gone. "You don't. They show up when the world needs them, and disappear when no one expects." That answer, like Ava herself, didn't boast, didn't preach, but opened a deep, echoing space that forced people to look inward. And though the story ends here, Ava Mercer's journey does not. She continues, stepping into the invisible borders where darkness yields to duty, where quiet hands must purchase peace. As for those who once underestimated her, they don't know if they will ever see Ava again. But they know one thing. Just 1 second of misjudging someone, one careless word of mockery. It is enough to open a door. They will never be ready to face it. And from that day on, Iron Ridge Tactical Armory was never the same noisy gun shop again. It became a place where silence was respected, a place where people remembered. Behind every ordinary face may lie a story no one knows. Behind every quiet person may be a history that no one can see. And behind every calm gaze may be a past that has never been spoken aloud. If this story reminds you of someone who was once judged unfairly, or if you yourself have walked through rooms filled with prejudice like Iron Ridge that day, leave a single dot in the comments. Just one dot, but a reminder that you're still here, still on your journey, just like Ava. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs a little more faith. And if you want to walk alongside stories that are quiet but deep, small but sharp like this one, follow Deep Life Tales. We have many more journeys to share.